Hi, I'm Liam Dann, New Zealand Herald Business Editor at Large, and welcome to this episode of Money Talks. This is a podcast about money, but we're not going to tell you how to get rich, and we're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned over the years. For today's podcast, and for the last episode of the season, I'm joined by former Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Sir Bill English. Sir Bill, kia ora and welcome to Money Talks.
Kia ora, how are you?
Good. Do you use that Sir much these days? Or?
Oh, I don't, but other people do.
Yeah. Anyway, it's nice to have you here. Can I start by just asking a little bit about what is keeping you busy these days? I know you were involved with the Kāinga Ora report, and that had a fair bit of publicity a few months ago. But what are the things that you are getting out of bed for in the morning at the moment?
Well, my wife Mary has her own medical practice as a GP, and as you can imagine, these days that's pretty busy. So part of my job is to support her because she's doing the long hours and the hard week.
Yeah.
I spend about half of my sort of official time on director jobs, including in Australia, a couple of larger companies, a couple of larger philanthropies, and some smaller private companies, and about the other half of my time on what I'd call family business, where along with my kids and one or two others, we've got into a number of smaller businesses that we're working on developing.
Sure, and you've got a lot of firepower there, right? Is it 6 children?
Yeah, there's just 2 of them in with us so far.
Right, yeah.
I guess if we're successful, they'll all want to sign up.
Yeah. Well, okay, look, we can come back to a bit of that, but I will go right back because this is what we do in this podcast, and just ask you if you can remember your very first memories of having money and holding money in your hands.
Well, I think it was the very first memories where after church on a Sunday we used to be given 5 cents to go around to the shop in Dipton and buy what was then called a TT2, which was actually an ice block.
Oh, I remember those. Yeah, I think I'm
and
just...
then I can recall going off the boarding and earning money. Probably the first memory, which will sound a bit odd to the general audience, is there was a time when you could pluck dead sheep. When sheep died,
yeah,
you'd pull the wool off them by hand, and a lot of farmers let their kids do that as their first taste of commerce.
Doesn't sound like something kids would be that keen on these days.
No, but the money was good. Wool used to be worth something.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah,
yep. And then I think my first paycheck was about $35 a week. I left school. I turned 18 and was working for my father, and I was kind of surprised that he decided to pay me.
Yeah.
Now it wasn't as much as he was paying the rest of them, but it seemed like a fair bit of money, and that was. That's where you start, like everybody else.
Yeah, and this was on the farm?
Yes, in Southland.
Yeah. So, and just, I mean, it is fairly well known, but you were also from a very big family yourself. You were the second youngest of was it 12?
Yeah, number 10, third youngest.
Youngest, yeah.
Patterns were pretty well established by the time they...
Yeah. I mean... What do you recall about money in the household? Was it, I mean, I guess it's an interesting one, farming generally, often you can have a lot of money invested in the land and all that sort of stuff, but not necessarily a lot of cash around.
Yeah, and cash wasn't really the focus. There was a strong focus on the family dimension, but also on the vocation of farming, if you put it that way. And I think that's where I learned a pretty important aspect of business, which is that your sense of purpose matters. So my parents wanted, of course, to have a viable, sustainable farm, but they did spend, I think, more of their energy on ensuring that their many children had the experience of self-sufficiency and hard work. And continuity, the point of doing this was to keep things moving along, doing a great job of the farming itself, but ensuring it could be passed on in good shape to the next generation.
Sure.
That probably mattered more to them at the time, more to them most of the time, in my experience, than the cash flow. Now, it could be, of course, they were worrying about the cash flow in the background because they had a lot of children, a lot of boarding school, and a lot of outgoings.
Are there any analogies there to managing an economy when you think about trying to hand off the economy in good shape, but it's not always about the cash flow or the operating end of it, is it?
No, that's right. I actually think that's important to business. I think the point, in my experience, the people who run the best businesses are the ones who are really have a strong sense of purpose about what they're trying to do. They do it well, and if you operate well with good people, then the cash flow looks after itself to some extent.
Yeah. When you think back to school, what were your passions at school, and were there any signs then that A, you were political, or B, that you could have ended up being finance minister and running the whole economy?
Oh, probably no sign of the finance minister part. I was interested in at school, very interested in sport, which was a bit harder when you were in the country. So going to boarding school was like going off to a fantastic holiday camp because you had sport. When we were at primary school, we were at home working. We didn't do any of the formal sport. And I was also very keen on reading.
Yeah.
And I think also listening to my parents were politically active. My mother in particular was an activist, my father more of a philosopher. Sir Brian Tallboys was our local member of parliament, the trade minister, when agriculture was a big deal and Britain going into the European community was a big deal. So at a relatively young age, I was exposed to all that.
Yeah.
And I think I decided reasonably early on I'd quite like to do the same job that Brian Tallboys was doing.
Yeah.
About 25 years later, I got to do it.
Was it? And it was always probably national for you, right? Growing up, farming background and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think. Look, the brand of the philosophy and approach to politics changes over time. At the time, you might remember we had SMPs, we had a lot of sort of statutory marketing boards. I mean, a wheat board loomed large in our lives. No one's heard of it since. I had actually just started farming when they got rid of SMPs with the changes under Roger Douglas and the fourth Labor government. So you'd call it a kind of collective conservatism, I would say. It's probably changed a bit now. Certainly, we had a local guy in our community in Dipton who actually started a political party. I think he called it the Liberal Country Party.
Right.
An acolyte of Milton Friedman, someone who you would now think of as reasonably mainstream economics.
So he's ahead of his time.
Free market economics. Yeah, way ahead of his time. A pretty colourful character, and at the time regarded as a real maverick. But he won his arguments in the end.
Yeah. I mean, do you remember much about the? I suppose it was through the 70s, really, growing up through that economy, that sort of controlled economy of the Muldoon years.
I do, and I remember the intense interactions over the government essentially negotiating the freezing workers' pay. The intensive discussions about reaching European veterinary standards in our freezing works and how much that cost the farmers. There was a lot of intensity because it was so political. Like you'd go to a meeting in the Dipton Hall with the local MP and 60 people would turn up.
Yeah.
And it's because the economy was pretty politicised. That wouldn't happen now, and in a sense for the right reason, and that is politicians aren't making the decisions that they did then. I remember John Falloon coming to Invercargill. He was an associate, he was a finance minister of some sort, to explain the interest rate controls.
Oh, yeah.
That have been put on. You forget those things
This is before there was any kind of, the Reserve Bank, just nothing was floating and, independent or anything like that then.
And an upshot of that was that when I started farming, my first mortgage was 22%, which wasn't peculiar to me, of course. That was the same for everybody. But it was a a signal of how out of balance things had got, and that times needed to change. And that was, pretty tricky in these communities that were strong supporters of Rob Muldoon on the one hand, but on the other hand, sort of had a sense that it wasn't all adding up to something that worked.
You obviously were working on the family farm, but you did head off to university, and famously, you've got an honours degree in English. Is that right?
Yeah, that came a bit later. I went to...
So that's the passion for reading.
Well, I think I was the only farm worker in New Zealand with scholarship Latin in the early 80s. So I went off to Dunedin and did an English degree and an accounting degree. Went back to the farm, where I was farming on our own account then, along with one of my brothers. So that was we were quite young, 22, 23, big mortgage, very difficult circumstances, made lots of mistakes, some of them pretty big.
Yeah.
From which I've learned and done it differently now that I've restarted.
Well, this was a time that some people were losing their farms during this period, right? This is it was a really tough era for New Zealand farming.
Oh, it was extremely difficult into the late 80s, and then for romantic reasons, where Mary was in Wellington and I was in Dipton, and we decided we should probably do something about that. So I shifted to Wellington, out of the sheep yards into an English honours class I wanted to get an honours degree so I could get a decent policy job. And another person you might have heard of who was in that class was John Campbell of media fame.
Right, yeah.
But a fantastic intellectual experience.
Yeah. Well, what was your specialty in English literature?
That was probably, what was it really? Kind of literary criticism, I think. All this
But
postmodern Marxist feminist analysis of how the world works, which turns out to be a powerful mechanism for understanding government monopolies as exercises of power rather than goodwill. I had some brilliant lecturers, and some of that toolkit I found really useful later in politics, the way people construct stories, and the sort of lack of self-awareness, particularly in government, where they are the power structure, and they think the corporates or someone are. Well, yep, that's another power structure, but government certainly is a powerful monopoly system.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was going to ask, because obviously the accounting people can get their head around how that's going to be useful for, economics and finance and all that. But I guess, there are that notion of learning about how people put together stories and how influential stories are in politics is probably pretty useful too. I mean, you weren't tempted to head off down a sort of the press secretary route, which a few English majors probably would.
No, well, I ended up as a diversity hire in the Treasury, where they were getting criticised for employing too many economists. These days they're getting it deservedly for not employing enough.
Yeah.
So they have an intake of 20 economists, and then there was 2 diversity people, of which I was one with an English literature degree, and found myself parked across the table from Roger Douglas, who used to work with junior Treasury officers through his revolution. On the flat tax package, I suppose, would be one thing that people are old enough to remember.
Yeah,
had unravelled the Labor government, but I was in a very small team of people who worked on that package. So it was fantastic to be in an environment where something was, politicians were making a lot of decisions, even if you didn't always agree with them. But secondly, where as a relatively junior person, you were given responsibility to really understand your issues and actually articulate them to decision makers. But I did decide after a while that I'd rather be on the politician's side of the desk than the policy advisor's side of the desk, and ended up in politics not long after that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what really motivated you to stand? It was 1990, wasn't it? What was the driver? Well,
I was always going to, as I said to Mary when we got married, I was interested in politics, and I always wanted to had in mind being the MP for what was then the Wallace seat, which was rural Southland essentially. Yep. I didn't want to do it anywhere else, and the opportunity arose probably 15 years earlier than we expected.
Right,
just because of ill health of my predecessor. So it was when I think back, it was remarkable that a young woman raised in Wellington who never lived in the country agreed to go off to the middle of Southland with little babies and get into the crazy world of politics. And I'm forever grateful to Mary for that courage.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, and you were into, you had a young family and stuff at that point?
We had one child when I was actually elected, and followed by 5 more.
I guess, how much was, finance or money a motivator and all that sort of, those career choices? As soon as you've got a child to worry about, you've got to be a bit serious, don't you?
Yes, you do. Well, yes, when you're young with children and a mortgage, then you want to get enough in the door. So, yeah, I've been fortunate to be able to have a bit of a balance of things I really liked and wanted to do, alongside getting enough money in to meet my responsibilities as a parent and a husband. At times it's pretty stretched, but I always think that what matters is your prospects rather than what's happening today. A lot of people can handle financial hardship if they think it's going to get better.
Yeah.
Real poverty is when you can't see any prospect of improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and just coming back to the economy and some really tough times, you in Parliament, I guess around the time of that mother of all budgets and some hard decisions having to be made. What do you recall about the economy at that time and the choices that, I guess, in hindsight, the national government had to make at that time?
Well, it was pretty grim in my community, which I knew better than any others, and it's in the rural communities. The dislocation that went on as part of the deregulation of the economy was enormous. And when I hear people talking about crises today, by that standard of that time, that's not a crisis.
Yeah,
maybe we should be more worried than we are, but people had to, whole communities were changed, their lives were changed. A lot of people lost their jobs, and that went on for a while. I think longer than the proponents of deregulation thought, or reform, and proponents of reform in the economy. And I remember in 1993, National won that election by 14 votes on a recount in Oamaru 2 weeks after the election. And that period in that 90 to 93 was pretty rough. I was chairman of the Social Services Select Committee. So we were we bore the brunt of the front end of public reaction to the benefit cuts. I was on a select committee with Michael Cullen and Helen Clark, and I'd never really chaired a rugby club subcommittee. So
it was a tough start then.
There was protests, there was crowds pushing down doors to get into our meetings. There was no security in those days. So it was a pretty hard-edged introduction to the politics of change. And it did left the mark on me in the sense that it's easy to advocate change if you don't have to if you don't have to look into the eyes of those facing the consequences. And I think the second thing was that if there's less urgency than there was then, there are other better ways of getting control of government spending than what were some pretty, some fairly tough decisions that were made then.
I guess people were, very, they were sick to death of inflation at that point, and the idea of getting inflation under control finally was pretty important, which is a little bit like what we've seen in the past few years. As you say, I agree with you that it's not quite as severe as it may have been back then, because we'd sort of had about a decade of it in those days. But do you recall that changing? Do you recall, I seem to remember sometime in the mid-90s that it suddenly started to come right for a bit.
Yeah, about 1995 heading into 96, which is what made National viable for re-election, because the economy was actually starting to pick up, although it wasn't that obvious, certainly not in the political world, but it was happening out in the countryside. And I think Jim Bolger actually deserved a lot of credit for seeing that period through. He didn't get much credit at the time, but while he didn't want to do it the same way as Ruth Richardson did all the time. Between them, about the right kind of things happened for the New Zealand economy. I think another lesson out of it was the dynamism that comes out of that sort of dislocation. People do come up with better ways of doing things, and I know even in the world of the sheep farming industry, its performance improved significantly over the next 10 to 15 years in a way that might not have happened. And if I had a concern about the economy now, it's that we've become pretty risk averse. We regulate and make policy in a way that dampens down the reallocation of resource. And that may be one of the reasons our productivity is not doing so well.
Yeah.
And looking ahead, I think it's a big issue.
Do you think politics is part of that? I mean, there's a constant battle the politicians face with the polling and the focus groups and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, of course, politics is part of it, but Kiwis are amenable to an argument where politicians making an argument that's sound and persistent. They can get there. One of the things that I was involved with, which I'm still proud of, was the tax switch, where we made the argument for what is good economics, and that is reducing income tax and increasing GST. And the public went with that, to a large extent because of the skills of John Key. But it just showed you can win an argument. We set out to win an argument about floating the energy companies, which I think has turned out to be critical in the energy transition.
Yeah.
And probably a bit more needs to be done there. But again, you make the argument that's in a way that's sensible, which I think was a bit of a shift from the mindset of the reformers late 80s and 90s, which was a bit more about crash or crash through.
Yeah.
Try and get enough done while you burn up your political capital. Well, MMP doesn't really let you do that, and it's not a bad thing. It forces you to make more coherent arguments. But you do need a political class that's interested in doing that and not dominated by managerialism of the status quo.
Yeah. You were treasurer at the end of the Shipley government, is that right? So was that your first major finance type role?
Yes, it was. I'd been involved mainly with health through the mid-90s, the health reforms, which had a great deal of merit, actually, and we're going to have to relearn some of those lessons. But then with the change of leadership in 97, I became a junior finance minister, and then I think just for a period of like 12 months, I was the treasurer, I think, or the finance minister.
I mean, and there's obviously a well-traversed story of your first go at leading the National Party and all that stuff. We probably haven't got time to do a whole political history, but I would like to jump into 2008 because, I was covering the GFC at the time. It was pretty hair-raising stuff, and you guys came into a pretty spectacular crisis. So that's as Deputy PM and Finance Minister. How do you, looking back at that, how do you think you guys handled it? And would you do anything different?
I don't think we do a lot different. There may be more, perhaps more opportunity for reform might have occurred in the absence of the earthquakes.
Right, yeah.
Remember, we're just kind of getting organised, and then we had...
It was a double blow, wasn't it, really?
2010, 2011 earthquakes. But look, you could go back in detail and see some things should have been done differently. But I think really what worked there, particularly with the leadership of John Key, the sort of operational effectiveness of what was a coherent cabinet, just maintain confidence through some pretty difficult times, and that's important. As we found out in recent years, you can, if confidence goes off and people aren't as willing to make investment decisions or employment decisions, then an economy inevitably slows. It's almost like a costless benefit. If the decision making looks like it's coherent and a bit predictable, then that's a gain for the whole economy that you didn't have to pay for.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember a moment when those, I guess after the big quakes in Christchurch, when you're just looking at the state of the books and thinking, oh my gosh, how can we possibly turn this around? How did you sort of view that? Because it was pretty daunting for a while, especially coming off the back of the GFC.
Yes, it was. Look, I think when things blow out like the requirements for the earthquake, really, I just remember thinking two things. One is we don't want to hold this back by being unwilling to spend. And if I was going to give credit for the person who really did the hard work on that, it was Jerry Brownlee.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job under difficult conditions of being on the ground, making decisions that were relevant in Christchurch and highly relevant to rebuilding the sort of shattered confidence in the place, at the same time as always having an eye on the dollars.
Yeah.
And he didn't put the government in the position of saying, well, I've gone off and spent all this money, you're just going to have to pay the bill. And I just think that was a remarkably constructive process. So that was one thing. And the second thing was that for a small open economy, as usual, you've got to keep your lenders well informed. And what they want to see and what we needed was a path back from what I think a 9% of GDP deficit, quite a bit bigger than what you've got now. Mm. And so we focused very much on the road to recovery, rather than being overly focused on saving every cent right now. What's the dynamic that's going to get you back? And in that context, the circumstances helped. You had 10% of GDP injection from reinsurers into the economy. That helped a lot because I was coming in to rebuild Christchurch. And the other, you got to remember, that was all just part of the golden era of Chinese growth and New Zealand as having a free trade agreement with China, which was a novelty then, worked on on a bipartisan basis. So it wasn't political as it might be now. That was quite a strong tailwind, and it was also a time when you were part of this long-term decrease in interest rates.
Yeah, yeah.
When you look ahead, those tailwinds aren't going to be there.
Yeah.
Interest rates can't keep dropping. They'll come off a bit. That's good.
Yeah, and people have highlighted that, China's still going to be a huge market, but that growth that we experienced won't be there. I mean, it's not going to be the same anyway. We've got to obviously find some other drivers.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a bit of a challenge because it's not obvious what those are going to be. Certainly you don't want governments trying to pick them. Yeah,
well, that's a fair point. Just quickly looking back, are there any other economic decisions over those 9 years that you, A, especially proud of, or B, that you regret?
Oh, well, the tax switch is one I was pretty keen on. Yep. I thought was a good piece of well-executed policy. I think the focus on the operation of the public sector was unheralded at the time, but people realised when the next government came along and took a different approach, that what they took for granted was probably fairly sensible. It is 20-25% of the economy. The most direct influence government can have on productivity in this economy is run its own business better. And you can run it better.
Yeah.
But you've got to decide to, and you've got to understand the levers there. And that was all given away. And we ended up, with this big spend up, including, COVID, which has justified some of it, big spend up with not much more to show for it. So, the health budget is 60% larger than 6 years ago with a small increase in output.
Yeah.
But I was pleased with the work that we did there. Early on, I remember making a few speeches around housing supply, when it was regarded as a cranky right-wing idea that supply had any influence on housing prices. And I think one unheralded success around that time was the Auckland Unitary Plan, which is the most, provided the biggest boost for house building in New Zealand in a long time, and that's still running, even though it's slowed down a bit. And I think the lessons from that are now being picked up by the current government and spread through the system. In fact, the last government picked up some of those lessons.
Yeah. I mean, are there regrets about 2017 and the negotiations and all that sort of stuff? It's one of the great what-ifs, I suppose. We're all surprised. I mean, on the night, I think we all thought you'd won it because it was a strong result. But, politics is politics, and Winston Peters is Winston Peters, and How do you view that now?
Oh, look, what over time your personal situation, take the benefits of the personal situation take over. So, look, I wouldn't want to swap the time I've had working with my family, being able to support Mary, running my own life. It's been fantastic. There's plenty of life beyond politics, and even at the time, I mean, look, I was a bit sorry about it. It was the wrong decision for the country. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But that's MMP. The voters had a say. National did okay, but its coalition partners did badly. The Māori Party didn't keep a seat and was out of Parliament, and ACT was only there because we made a deal to let them stay there. And I'm sure there's some lessons from that I haven't spent a whole lot of time on.
Yeah.
But look, it's politics. I'd always thought in politics you get these incredible opportunities and you don't necessarily deserve them. A lot of it comes your way from circumstance and other people who you work with or the great team around you. But it can go in an instant, if only because of your own mistakes and stupidities. And an election, though, was the public's view on it, and you just I accepted that view and get on with the rest of your life, and that's worked out well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as you've sort of hinted at, there are huge impacts economically from it all. And you look at the COVID era and what happened. If you'd been in power then, would it have been wildly different policy, do you think, that you'd have followed?
Oh, look, you can't tell for sure, and I didn't, focus a lot on the details of the policy making. I think a couple of things might have been different. That one, I think we would have recognised the trade-offs and been willing to work with them a bit more than the government at the time. There's a high cost to that kind of lockdown, and in a sense, we're still paying that cost now.
Yeah.
And you look at other countries that have had a hard lockdown, and there's others who are harder than New Zealand, and they're paying a price too. I think the second thing was that the sense of that the government was absolutely central to everything happened in the economy lingered on after COVID, after it was necessary. And I think that's just part of the predilection of a Labor government. And a complacency in the public service. And so there was quite a lot of, poor decision making after COVID that flowed from attitudes developed during COVID. Otherwise, look, people make the decisions they do at the time, and I hope there is going to be this, inquiry they're talking about doing will be a bit more than backslapping by the public health establishment about what a great job it did, because there's a lot of other consequences and we just need to understand them.
Yeah. You don't think you're going to be involved in any more government inquiries or reports coming up?
No. I had a stint at KO and I enjoyed that. But otherwise, I've got plenty to do.
Look, I want to get in just to finish up some of our quickfire Money Talks questions, to bring it back to money a little bit. First up, what would you say the poorest you've ever been is?
Oh, well, look, there's been plenty of times I didn't have cash either but always had work. But I remember feeling very poor after buying Mary's engagement ring. I had my life savings on the engagement ring and a trip to go and see her. Thinking, actually, I've got no money in the bank. But I always had prospects. So I have to say I don't think I ever felt poor. Certainly felt under pressure.
Yeah.
With a young family with mortgages and outgoings, and then unpredictable things happen. So, nothing to complain about. But, in my broader family, I've seen persistent poverty and either from, ill health or bad luck or poor decision making, and it's grinding on people. And what I've seen of that has been part of the motivation for taking an interest in those issues.
Yeah. Sort of the flip question to that is, I suppose, and I don't think we should count the ring for your wife, but what's the most indulgent purchase you've ever made, or when you?
Well, that was certainly the most disproportionate one to my wealth at the time. I'm not really an indulgent purchaser. Sometimes I think, buying a nice jacket can feel indulgent, but it's, well within.
I think I interviewed the late Sir Michael Cullen along these lines, and he was very similar. He talked about splashing out once on an $80 bottle of wine. I thought it wasn't the same as interviewing Sir John.
Well, that's
good for finance ministers to, maybe to.
That's right. We still get accused, as finance ministers, you still get accused of, being inconsistent with the constrictions you put on other people.
Do you buy lotto tickets, and do you imagine winning lotto still?
Oh, occasionally. I did buy one, I think last year, and in my head, I've got a 90-year-old father-in-law who always used to buy golden kiwi tickets, and he's came here as a Samoan migrant, worked very hard all his life to raise 13 children. And I always thought, well, wouldn't a windfall be a nice reward for all that?
Yeah.
But of course, my nearest and dearest family think that was just cover for wanting to buy a lotto ticket.
I guess another one about money, really. But how much? You've sort of answered this. But how much is making money important to you, and how much of that is money just the byproduct of success or of what you do?
Having spent 5 or 6 years now in small businesses, then there's, you're certainly keen on the byproduct because it's hard to come by.
Yeah,
it's I enjoy the challenge of it, but a lot of businesses make enough money to make a living, and any number of them disappear. So it's not like it's not as easy a ticket to significant income as probably the policy world thinks it is. But look, I think the purpose for which you do business is a significant determinant of whether it's successful. And success comes in different forms, doesn't it? It can be growth, it can be profitability, it can be, building a team of people who really work out how to provide value for their customers. And the other bit of success is just happy customers. I mean, we one of the things we do is service charities, and for the young people who do it, it's enormously rewarding because they just see these people who are trying to do good, figure out how to do it better. But it is. I think. Look, one of the great things about having a bit of income is it just reduces the cognitive load of worrying about the day-to-day cash outgoings all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's great for people, particularly as they get later in life, if they can get a bit of that space, because you spend a lot of time, making, like we used to, because we had 6 kids, 5 boys, you try and buy food on cents per kilo of dry matter. So it's Wheat Bix, bananas, rice.
Yeah. Pasta. I'm feeding 2 teenagers at the moment. Boy, they can eat.
The more of it you can get, the better.
Yeah. We can't ask you what you would do if we made you Prime Minister for a day, because you had plenty of days as Prime Minister. But I guess we could ask you if we could put you there again. Is there anything you wish you had done, or that you would do if you had another chance?
Oh, well, that's a hard question to answer, actually, because I always felt like you need to feel like you're working at the outer boundary of your capacity to achieve when you're there. Sometimes I think it'd be, look back and think we could have pushed through. The one area I think we could have pushed through harder, and is happening now is around housing, because the housing affordability is such a significant driver of misallocation of capital, poverty for lower income households. It's like a juggernaut, that needs to be turned around. And we got started on that, and but perhaps could have pushed harder. Sometimes these things are a matter of public acceptance. I mean, the current government's making decisions in that area which would have caused a riot as recently as 2017.
Yeah. I mean, Chris Bishop actually said house prices come down. You couldn't say you couldn't have a politician a few years ago saying that they were in favour of house prices coming down.
No, and that's just because it wasn't bad enough yet.
Yeah.
But, it got bad enough. And so people are accepting more radical solutions. And I think that's a positive sign. I'm a bit of a believer in these self-balancing forces.
Yeah. And my producer, Ethan's just written CGT here. I'm thinking you're probably thinking supply side when you talk about, rather than CGT or demand side stuff for housing. When you look back, would you have done anything more on the tax side?
Oh, we had a pretty good look at it. I think every finance minister does. And then it runs into two problems. One is just the implementation of it, and I think you'd find even in countries where they have it, it's arguable about whether it's net revenue or not. And then the other in New Zealand is just the politics, which
still
gets tested
tough
every now and again.
Yeah, that's another battle Labor's got to go through
again,
right?
Work. But in general, you want your tax base moving away from things you want more of, like income and work and returns on capital. And you want your tax base more around things that can't move and that you don't want more of. So you want it on fixed assets, land, wealth and consumption, if you can. So it's moved a bit that way, and it's moving further. Just look at rates or a land tax, and they're going up, 10 to 20% per annum for the next 5 years across New Zealand. So we're going to get a bit of a live experiment in growth in capital taxes.
Yeah. And so it's just on the supply side, were there any specifics that you're talking about opening up land, or would there have been a national version of a Kiwi build or something like that could have been done?
Oh, no, just the regulatory change.
Making it easier to build.
Yeah, microeconomics and regulation is boring, but absolutely vital. And when it works well. I think New Zealand's done a pretty good job of its energy markets, for instance. Not perfect, but it's better than a lot of other places. And it's and in housing is all about regulation and pushing back plannerism, which is a lot of people designing nice cities with and buildings with no recognition at all of the economics.
Yeah.
But that's coming. Right? It's underway. Even in Wellington, a group of young millennials was able to persuade a fairly limited council to make sensible decisions about housing and housing affordability. Well, that's promising.
Well, that's good to hear. Look, so just a last question. I know we've got to let you go. It really is a big one, really, and it's around where you think the issues around social inequality and poverty lie, and maybe with the time you've been working with charity and a lot of all the experience you've had. What do you think it is that really, I guess, keeps some people poor and some people manage to get out of that? And what do you think the number one thing we should be focusing on to address it is?
Oh, look, I think if you had to pick a number one, it would be housing costs.
Yeah,
housing affordability. And I think number two is the way that traditional government delivery of service, which is billions a year, doesn't work for complex families or communities, and the poor mainstream government services become part of the pathology of poverty. And we've got some of the worst record in the OECD of using education to overcome inequity, and actually it's recent work that shows our health system's not much better, and that's driven to a large extent by a universalist mentality, that is that you're meant to treat everybody the same. And we just see it time and again in the work that we're doing. Customer focused delivery in the context of a trusted relationship is magic. Doesn't answer all the poverty issues, but if you've got the housing right and that government service delivery right, I think you make a significant impact. And then there's always the arguments about redistribution. How far do you go with just shifting cash around? But there's other bits you can do that are going to make a significant difference that I've talked about.
Yeah. Hey, look, Bill, we're going to have to let you go there, but Sir Bill, I should have said, sorry. Thank you very much for coming and making the time to talk to us on Money Talks.
No problem. Thank you very much, Liam.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to this episode and to this season. We'll be back in 2025. In the meantime, listen to Money Talks on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and catch up on some of our past guests while you wait for the next season. Thanks to my producer Ethan Sills and my sound engineer Leanne McDonald. And if you want to get in touch, email me at liam.dan@nzme.co.nz and read more business news and features at nzherald.co.nz.